All right, welcome back, guys. If you watched the four-part series, then you got to this Saturday where I am going to tell you right now, based on what we did towing and everything like that, which truck I think wins the cake right now. A lot of things went into consideration here. We did everything that we possibly could. But I know some people are going to say, well, that's just the plains. The plains are just where, the flatlands where all the nice lakes are at and everybody likes going water skiing and camping and stuff. But what about when I go camping in the mountains? Well, as soon as we get the brakes fixed on our trailer, so the reason why we use the cruising castle one, it was a little bit bigger than my fifth wheel, so the big cruising castle was my parents. Last year when I bought our small trailer, I knew something was grinding in the brakes, so didn't want to take that on this trial because I didn't want to, one, have an issue with the trailer, two, wanted to put a little bit more weight behind it. But found out my trailer needs brakes, so we're going to get brakes on that, and here within 1 or 2 weeks we will then be going up to the Ike Gauntlet, and we're going to run it the whole route. We're not just going to go up 8 miles. Guys, it's a whole climb coming out of Denver. So what we'll do is we'll do that climb through the Eisenhower, back up. We're going to switch and then go back around the whole thing. So we're going to have like another 4-part series on that one where we're going to put it to the test. However, I've driven enough gas trucks. I drive a V10 stake body almost every day up into the mountains and everything like that. And albeit it is not quite as good as the Power Strokes we have, it gets the job done. And that's what this is really about. A lot of people have blasted still the same comments, like, you don't know what you're talking about. Diesels will always be the winner here no matter what. Okay, first things first, if you've seen any part of my channels, I've owned a diesel of almost every manufacturer since the late 80s. Okay, so if you don't know, there's a lot of diesels that came in between then, and there was a lot of time where people didn't even want the diesels because we had the big 454 and the big 460, and then they brought the V10 in the early 90s in from Ram, and nobody even wanted those diesels because the diesels just didn't produce the numbers that people were used to coming from gas. And back in the day, other than semi-tractors, most grain trucks of those early era, like the 2-ton dump trucks, 3-ton dump trucks, stuff like that, were actually all small displacement V8 gassers. Fast forward to now, the diesels are still always going to be the best towing machine, okay? All right? But now, because of emissions, that's choked down the ability of the modern diesel. In addition to that, the upkeep of all those extra catalyst systems that go along with being a diesel, there's just a lot more to it. It's not just hop in and idle it all day, okay? It's more about what's happening later on, and then people will say, well, my diesel, I'll get better resale of it. You probably will because you paid more for it, so that's the way it's going to be. And then some people will say, well, I'm going to get more miles out of this diesel than you're going to get this. Okay, well, I'm going to show in this video how long it's going to take you at this current. If we just took the current test today and set it based on those parameters, I'll tell you how long it's going to take you to now negate the cost of that diesel engine. Because at the end of the day, most people aren't going to keep their vehicle that long. And I'll tell you why, because it's a lot. So at the end of the day, this isn't necessarily to poo-poo anything, gas or diesel. This is to give people new to the heavy-duty market an opportunity to think outside the box. It's also an opportunity for people to take that money they could have spent on a diesel engine and spend it maybe on a nicer camper or spend it on an extra week with their kids. Your money's your money. We all work hard for it. So if you want it to, and you have it to spend, then spend it and roll. It's really no thing to me. But my channel is to say, does one of these even do better, than the other? And can it eat at the table with the big kids, meaning the diesels? Can it? Well, of course it can. And so, like I said, we're going to further test this later just to show it. Again, if anybody wants to say, well, my diesel, hey man, congrats. I've had enough diesels in my life that I was ready to finally say, you know what? Spending $10,000 more and $1 more in a gallon, which in Colorado it's still about 60 cents or more a gallon for diesel. maybe I'll stop. And then most people that are even getting to 100,000 with these modern diesels, they're usually burning up a turbo because they more than likely didn't do the regens as required, and they're shutting that down with the regen and need, and they're just baking that cake and they're keeping all that heat. So there's my rant on that. I want to cover that way ahead of time of where we're going next with the channel and what my plans are, and just set out the stage of any of you diesel fans. Cool, I'm a diesel fan too. And all you guys coming from a diesel to a gas and are excited about where these trucks are at. So we're all good. This isn't necessarily any type of scenario where I'm here to replace your guys' beloved diesels, okay? Because I know that they can't put a big enough gas in the Peterbilt to have it work, or in the Kentworth I have it work, and probably get the same job done. But at the end of the day, this is about what's up to date now. And now it's the gassers time. So let's talk. All right, so up first, let's talk just base numbers, okay? So I put a 2022 Ford F-250 with the 7.3 Godzilla against a stock 6.6 2024 Chevrolet Custom, all right? Now, the reason why I wanted to do this year, the 24 of the Chevy, and against even a 22 or anything, because Ford's had the 10-speed torque shift in their gasser for a while. And Chevy just brought the venerable Allison 10-speed. Now, people will say, well, it's not the same as the Allison and the L5P. It is. There's no discussion. It's the same model number. I've talked to 2 GM reps, looked at the GM ordering sheet. It's the same transmission, okay? What they did with computer programming on it, I'm not getting into that, but it is the same transmission, so you are getting plenty of beef where it needs to be, all right? The reason why I also went with the 22 is because that's what I currently had. And really in 23, it only bumps up the horsepower yet even more with the Godzilla. So really the Chevy coming at this test was really behind the 8 ball. My current Godzilla puts out 430 horsepower and 475 pounds of torque. Doing those numbers right about 5,500 RPM on the horsepower and 4,000 RPM on the torque. So the Chevy comes in at a kind of like a, I guess if you would call it, a measly 401 horsepower and 464 on the torque. Doing that horsepower number at 5,200 RPM and 4,000 on the tach for the torque. So really, it really was pinned. If I was to bring in the 2023 Ford, it's going to have more. It got like a bump of 10 on each number. So it really was a real fair shake when it came to that. All right. So as you guys know, the big red truck is rated at 18.5 when it comes to gooseneck and fifth wheel towing. Those are good numbers for a gas 3/4 ton. In addition to that, the Ford is rated about 14.5, 14.7. Okay, so this test was going to put these basically at their max, and I was saying it was about 15. So before everybody says, well, you overloaded the Ford. Okay, well, in respect, most of those numbers are probably 10 to 20% under what they know you're going to overload it to. But that being said, we did take it to a CAT scale and got weights on it, and they were very much in check with max of what the Ford can do. But the Chevy, even though less powerful, did leave plenty of room on the table to do more towing. All right, so if you guys haven't watched any of the other videos or any of the parts, we're going to go over this quick. I did have this this system basically set up for both trucks. So this Kurt adapter plate, which there's plenty of videos on my channel if you want to watch how all that works. But this system just flip-flops over to the Ford. So there's no reason weight for weight wise the trucks were very similar. Matter of fact, the CAT scale tickets were off by about 120 pounds. That being said, we'll talk about curb weights and everything here a little bit. The Godzilla, or the General as we call it, did have a tonneau on it, did have my chains in it, did have an extra hitch in it, did have all of my straps and stuff I typically carry with me. And that one in general has a little bit more swag in it. And the curb weights are very close to each other. So that makes a lot of sense with those about 400 or 500 pounds worth of added options. All right, so from the factory, the Chevy came with lots of extra trailing stuff, like this rear view camera mirror. I don't care where this camera view is at. It's just a nice tool to have. but it came with it at the price point it was. And I'm going to break down at the end how all this plays together when everybody's trying to say, hey, I'm trying to get into a heavy duty truck. Which one can do the job, do it safely, because all of these considerations come in. And at the end of the day, we'll all admit it comes down to the almighty dollar. Okay. If you're not brand loyal, you want to say, who can I get the most bang for buck from? So as you guys know, the Chevy does have a setup in it for trailer light testing, which is kind of nice because you can turn it on, walk around the trailer, and get a test of all the lights. Unless, say, you have somebody inside the vehicle that can help you. But most times, these are actually going to be just extra things that Chevy's thought of that's going to give you, a leg up and be able to do more things with less people. As your kids grow old and it's just you and your wife's doing her thing, or your significant other's doing their thing, and you're responsible for checking these before you go. I appreciate that aspect of the Chevy. Then we also made sure that both trucks had Timbrins, okay? Timbrins are a suspension enhancement system. No, for all the people that said bags are better, that is correct. Bags are probably going to be better, but with bags there comes a little bit more cost, a lot more maintenance, a little bit more abilities and access to air compressors and ways to fill those bags if need be, or the ability to relieve pressure and check pressure. And so some of those things may not be in the wheelhouse. So I like Timbrins. I did a video on this. You guys go check it out. Both trucks were set up for Timbrins. And once we dropped the front jacks here on the trailer, we can actually see that the truck was actually level. I usually always call it sagging because it compresses the suspension, gets down the overload. But that being said, it basically made the trucks level. All right, both trucks do have the trailer brake integrated inside the truck. We use tow haul mode on this scenario. We reset the fuel economy and then just ran it as such. I know it came up as a question. I have checked the Chevy. We are only currently at about 700, almost 800 miles. At the time of the test, it was 439. So early in the towing career, so this truck really wasn't broke in yet. But as of right now, the Chevy fuel estimating gauge is about 0.5 miles off, so a half a mile. The Ford is about 0.2 from hand calculations compared to what the computer is telling us. So I feel very confident that we can use those in a real world scenario of figuring fuel economy. And we're going to just round out to probably the hundreds on those scenarios. All right, so as for the Ford setup, we had the same thing. Again, the extra weight comes in from the tonneau. Again, I carry extra chains, hitch stuff, straps, and stuff like that in the back. And the curb weights are not that far off. Drop down on the Timbrins. You can see that the jacks are up. The truck did ride level. Like I said, the Timbrins tend to take that sag right out. Again, Ford doesn't offer in this trim level the light test. I don't remember if I had that in the Lariat, and I don't know if that's new for 23. I know they added a bunch of new trailer tech, so more than likely it might be an option. But as we are right now, it was just a walk around and check. One thing that the Ford did offer is inside here they have a trailering module that gets more sophisticated as you go up in trim levels. You can choose your actual tow kind, fifth wheel here. Then you can go through a checklist, if you will. It doesn't actually involve the truck doing anything. It's basically a yes, no scenario type thing. Again, it's no actual input of the truck, but you would go through this screen, and on the steering wheel, you'd hit OK. It gives you like a 6 or 7 step checklist of things to check, lights and this and that. Again, it's not doing anything through the truck system. It's just asking you to confirm it. But I do like it, especially until you get used to your system and your truck and your rolling. It reminds you to take the wheel chocks out and put the landing gear up, stuff like that. So that is a nice piece. No extra cameras in the system whatsoever than the standard backup camera, but no bed view camera. All right, both trucks did have a temperature gauge for the transmission. We use tow haul mode. We set up the trailer brakes to the trailer brake gain because, again, both had integrated trailer brake controllers. And I did not limit the actual range of the transmission. I let it roll. And some people say, well, I would have taken those gears out. Well, when the truck was in the need of pulling hills on this test, it never went up to those higher gears, so it was kind of a moot point, I guess, if you will. Maybe on the flatland, people would say, well, I wouldn't tow in 10th gear. Well, I would say, well, why not? Because, you know, in the semis at work that are automated, we let them roll in their top gear and they do the 50-point shift whenever they need it. Again, that is just something that, you know, you'll have to decide for yourself. But the Ford does offer a range selector, orange being the gear it's currently in, and then it'll do that. But we just left it in standard tow haul mode and normal drive mode, I guess, if you will, in that one. Chevy didn't allow you to see your transmission gear unless you pulled it down to manual. Then you'd only say over here, it would say D/10 or D9. But that's only if you limited it. That would be your top gear that you're limiting it to. So we got going with the Chevy, and the good thing about this route was initially I was going to do 60 miles. I ended up just wanting to keep driving. I enjoyed driving both trucks, but I ended up doing a 108-mile loop. So this involved several grades of 5 to 6% grade over anywhere between half a mile and a mile, and this was literally just constant. So what I guess this would emulate would be potentially like a lot of shifting for the truck versus having to stay in that torque band, which the Ike test that we'll do later will help with that and show how it stays with that constant grade. And then going down on that scenario, there's going to be no pulling and stuff like that. But one thing I liked about this one, like I lost count at over like 100 and some odd hills that was literally up and down and up and down. And these were just down in a gulch, straight up. Down in a gulch, straight up. So we can see right here on one of the biggest hills, the Chevy got all the way up to the 5K mark on there. But what I will tell you is it kept it at 65. Now, most of the time I'm not going to try and push it like this, but everybody's going to be like, well, every truck can pull at 55 miles per hour. Well, not necessarily, but okay, sure. So I just kept it locked in. I set the cruise control 65. At no point did the Chevy ever not keep it at 65 unless I was slowing down. This was the highest point, but again, as we talked about in the initial torque and horsepower numbers, this is where Chevy says it's going to make its horsepower. So most people say, well, I wouldn't want to get it to that. Okay, then you can back your speed off. But what I'm trying to prove here is the truck can do it. One thing, again, I'll tell you the law of averages down here is the transmission temp was currently at 160 degrees pulling this hill. So not bad. All right, but similar, when we switch over here to the Ford, we can see right here the cruise control was set at 62. I had the Chevy set at 65. TAC was up here close to around 5. Again, Ford's okay with making their peak numbers at that 5K range, so nothing crazy there. And you can see right here that the transmission was in third gear. It just never got up above like 6th or 7th climb in that. And one thing we can see right here is the trans temp being at 198. So as we kind of go back over those little stints of the video, just to put everything in context, you know, at the end of the day, the Ford transmission, the torque shift was way busier the entire time, the entire trip. Okay, guys. And I took averages of everything, so we'll get to that in a minute. The transmission was way busier and everything like that. But overall, both trucks pulled this 108 miles just fine. So I know there's some people that probably live in areas where they have hills and really not, and maybe some steep grades, but it's really not that important to have a diesel or anything like that. And I think for the majority of people that this type of test puts it in real life for you, that both these trucks got the job done. Now the ways the videos kind of play out is, it kind of wrapped out. We headed down to Burlington, Colorado. That's where we stopped in and got the CAT scale. We actually later confirmed that the trailer weight itself was around 14,850. Now that trailer could be up to, I think I remember the sticker on the trailer was like 16.5-ish. That'd be with water, gear, food, and whatnot. So we were okay there. So we weren't that far over the 14.5 mark for the Ford on towing. Coming into Burlington, I tried something with both trucks. And this is important because, again, it's not about just speed and getting up to speed. It's about being able to control that load, slow that load, and everything like that, especially coming out of the mountains. But in this respect, had the cruise control set at 65. And the way that city works is, and you have to use some planning with this, but I just wanted to see, going into town, very small decline, went from a 65, 45, 35, 25. Without touching the brakes, again, I used cruise control for this entire test, both trucks, using only the transmission to slow me down, I started using the decel or the minus on the cruise control. And what I did notice is the Chevy just, boom, just went right down to speed. Now, granted, I saw the 45 coming up, so start slowing down way before. Otherwise, if you're in 65 and you get to 45, you need to be at 45, so you're going to have to use the brakes. But I just wanted to see if the truck itself could do that and how fast it would do. So we're talking probably less than a mile. I knew it was going to drop. I used the transmission to control those speeds, and it literally did. It took me all the way down to 25. Brake applications going up and down those hills, zero. The only time I used the brakes and then reset the cruise was going around some of the curves that were like 50 mile an hour recommended speeds. Again, a fifth wheel is a very tall object. It's a giant windsock. So that is what it is. Coming into Burlington with the Ford, very similar type of slowing down, not as good, I guess, if you will, with the downshifts, because I was letting the actual truck do it itself. If I was doing the input with the little, fake shifter over here, then maybe it'd been more exaggerated. But again, I wasn't going to try and put any more input than what the truck was doing, especially if we want to use that dynamic braking that the cruise control in the truck uses itself. And that's what we're going to be using on the Ike Gauntlet. So both trucks did really well there. Went over to the Catskills, got the weights, turned around, checked tires, got everything, and started heading back. On the way back, that's the final fourth video where you'll see we're just kind of wrapping up and everything. Countless hills. Had an opportunity to basically just let the trucks just run themselves out. And when we got to some of those steep hills, I wanted to do the same thing. I basically wanted to see how fast that truck could slow it down, and if so, if it would coast, just like I assumed it would. But I showed that in video 4 where it did. It picked up speed, and on one of those, I actually slowed the truck down before I let it coast, so it could have been way faster. So if you're going to come out of the Eisenhower Tunnel at 50 or 60, whatever they have the speed limit set for that day, you're going to pick up speed. But say if you just had it set at 50, I think that the cruise control would hold it. I'm so used to going up Eisenhower in a semi that my speeds are much slower. So when I talk about 35s and 45s and 50s, yes, the general public does get to go faster up and down those hills, and they get to use all lanes, but I get stuck using the right lane. But depending on your scenario, you might be over that weight and have to use it too by law. So just keep that in mind. So both trucks did really well. All right, so let's break down some real world numbers here. Going over it, and I want to talk about bang for buck here at the end of the day. Curb weight on the Ford is 68.85 in weight. The Chevy 74.51. But again, we are only about 130 pounds off, so some of that's my gear that I keep in the Ford, in addition to the tonneau. Keeping in mind, on top of that curb weight, I did add the factory puck system, which is a couple 100 pounds, and I did add an aftermarket spray and bed liner. So with that in mind, those will go into the cost and everything later when we talk about which truck might be the best one, I guess, at this point. But that's why the weights are so very similar overall. Like I said, I mean, the trailer weight didn't change either time, but the gross weight was 21,735 on the Ford and 22,301 on the Chevy. So just a little bit more. But again, that's using the curb weight plus the trailer weight. So because I added the puck and stuff, that's where we're getting that 120 pounds difference. All right. We'll talk about pricing and stuff in here in just a second, but I want to go over kind of the meat and potato stuff right here. As you saw in most of the videos, the torque shift did run hotter, period. Okay. And I took an average. So depending on what part of the video you saw, you can kind of like, well, I thought I saw it running cooler. I saw it running hotter. You're probably right. So I did a law of averages. The highest that transmission temperature got was 235 degrees, which is about 50 degrees hotter than the Allison did. So very interesting that it did run that hot, because again, we didn't push it. We didn't run it any harder or anything like that. The ambient temperature outside was 72 at the time we did the Chevy test, and about 78 by the time we did the Ford test. So not a huge disparaging difference, although it was a little bit warmer. But we also had a breeze, so I don't know. It was close enough for that, but average temperature ended up being 218 on the Ford with the averages. And the highest the GM Allison got was 192 degrees, and it averaged out at 185 the entire time. So one thing I noticed about, again, busy work, the torque shift was busy, constantly moving. Not in that 8, 9, 10, so we're just take that out of the equation. It really stayed busy. The Chevy just kind of stayed right in a sweet spot. I can't even put my finger on it because it just never was guessing. But again, if you've never driven an Allison, so you've had the Allison in the Ram, I've had those. Those are some clunky, beefy transmissions. The Allison is light years ahead of everybody. And again, we're not arguing the point that this might be an Allison/GM transmission. No doubt it most likely is of some kind, but Allison slapped its name on it and it does meet their standards. And I will say that this feels everything of an Allison transmission. So I like that. Big number for everybody. Where did the Ford do? The Ford constantly gets better fuel economy, driving, doing whatever it's doing over the 6.6 gas. This is not a surprise to me. I noticed this in my Duramax, my first gen L5P, and I noticed this in the 6-speed version of the 6.6 gasser. So it's not a mind-blowing thing, but I did run premium fuel in both trucks to give them both the best opportunity that we possibly could. Ford came in and that 108-mile round trip at 8.3 miles per gallon. The Chevy came in at 7.8. So we're off about 0.5, which could be that the truck's just not broken in or nothing, but it wasn't a disparaging huge difference. Unladen from Denver down to there, the Godzilla got about 16 and a half. Again, I wasn't driving at the time, but 16 and a half. The best I ever got was 17 and a half, and the Chevy got about 16 and a half. Again, that truck's not broke in, and on the way down there, it only had like 300 miles on it. So I'm going to give a little bit of the doubt to the Chevy on that. But again, 0.5 miles per gallon is not a disparaging difference, and I'll break it down to you. Because fuel costs are such a big deal, and this is where the diesel fanatics are going to come in and say, well, my diesel will do this, and I get 100 miles a gallon. Okay, if you do, in a perfect world, that is fantastic. But I had a first-gen L5P towing. Best I ever got was about 11. I drew up us 2 scenarios with an L5P in this scenario, but let's break it down. So in that 108-mile trips, if we used the 8.3 miles per gallon, we used about 13 gallons to make that trip. The cost would have been about $41.76. That's using just the last fuel stop I saw out there. I saw it higher. I saw it a little bit lower, but compared to diesel, it's all about the same. $3.21 a gallon. Okay, so that breaks down in the Ford cost to being about 38.66 cents, per mile to drive that truck. Now the Chevy, on the other hand, being at 13.8 gallons used, it came in using $44.44 worth of fuel, which breaks down to about 41.1 cents per mile to operate it. So it's not a huge big difference in the grand scheme of things. Matter of fact, I think I figured it out to being that's about 2.5 cents per difference going from the 7.3 to the Chevy, at least in fuel costs. All right, so where this is going to break down, I'm going to come back to some more fuel stuff here in a minute for the diesel heads. But when I bought the Godzilla, I bought it for an MSRP of $62,080. However, I had to add the hitch and I had to add the bed liner. So if you're going to equip your truck, it is what it is. So that truck itself cost $63,080. And the Chevy, as equipped, needing nothing else to tow, was $59,265. So we have a difference of $38,15. At the end of the day, I feel like the Chevy has more in this custom package. It offers just a little bit more like important things versus the Ford. It gives you the buckets and stuff like that. That may not be important to most people. Maybe they want that trailering camera, and they may want that multi-flex tailgate so they can hook up easier and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, the trucks are very comparable equipment-wise. One has this over here and the other one has this over here. But at the end of the day, the Chevy was $3,815 cheaper than the Ford. Okay? So at 2.5 cents per mile, you'd have to own that for 152,600 miles to make up that 2.5 cents difference. So if you're coming into the market saying, I need a heavy duty truck, I need to pull my trailer and work for this, and yes, fuel economy is important, but at the end of the day, Chevy wins here. Chevy wins. just about in every aspect of every trim level coming in, especially with the max tow 3/4 ton package if you're going L5P. So I would have to say, yes, the Chevy wins here because breakdown cents per mile, the Chevy makes more sense. And at the end of the day, you're getting more bang for your buck. Most people aren't going to keep these trucks for 152,000 miles. Most, okay? But let's go down to the diesel guys, because here's the $10,000 option, at least on the Chevy side. And the Ford side, it could be more. And on the Ram side, it's about the same. If you get the HO, whatever, it's a little bit more. Same trip. If we give the L5P an actual break and say, okay, well, you're going to get 11 miles to the gallon. That would have taken 9.81 miles per 9.81 gallons to make this trip. At $4.10 a gallon versus $3.21, it would have cost $4.25 to make that trip. So you're talking it cost to run that truck 37.26 cents per mile. So we're talking just a smidge under the Godzilla, and 3 cents, 4 cents under the Chevy. But breaking that down, you're going to have to, at 4 cents of benefit, 4 cents, and this is not including DEF or your diesel getting higher than that current cost right there, which is only 90 cents. Anything like that, you have to now keep your diesel for 250,000 miles. So most people aren't going to do that to make up those costs, okay? All right, so I knew this was going to be a long one, guys, but people wouldn't believe me if I told them, if I just said this, so I had to break it down on all these numbers. So when we're sitting here talking about, I need a diesel because, listen, you're probably not going to tow over 100 days a year, so a gasser might be a viable option. And if you're going to say, well, diesels get better fuel economy, I just showed you where diesels maybe don't have much of a benefit for you until you reach hundreds of thousands of miles. Well, by the time you get there, more than likely your needs have changed, your forecasting, your family needs have changed. So I don't believe that makes sense in a lot of people's realm, but dudes that are or ladies that are driving 500,000-600,000 miles in their truck, sure, that might make sense. Again, the jury's out if either one of these motors can last 200,000, 300,000 miles. So it's not really relevant to say, well, I can rebuild the gasser probably for a couple $1,000 or replace it for $3,000. It's going to cost you $5,000-6,000 to rebuild a diesel. But you got turbos and EGRs and DPFs. Those are all going to burn up way before that motor does, typically. So those are $5,000-6,000-7,000 anyway. So that's just a kind of a negating cost to me. But money's no purpose to do your thing. So at the end of the day, which one handled better? Overall, the Ford felt light in the steering. Usually has a heavier steering feel than the Chevy. The Ford felt a little squirrelier with the trailer on, even though the ride height was fine and we weren't overweight or anything like that. So I have to give overall the ride towing ability goes to the Chevy. The Chevy just always felt confident. It felt control. It felt substantial. It felt big, and it felt good. Ride quality without being, loaded with something. The Ford has softer seats, but it has a rougher ride, which means you feel more road input. It just bounces more. It feels like a wagon going over ruts. The Chevy rides better, even though it has harder seats, more firm seats. It rides better, so the hard seats don't feel quite as hard, I guess. You know what I'm saying? No matter how soft it is, if you're hitting bumps, I have air ride in my semi. You still feel every damn bump. Your spine is hating you at the end of the day. So overall, handling and ride, the Chevy wins on this one. Okay. When it comes to transmission ability, I like the torque shift. I have no problems with the torque shift. Allison's going to win every day of the week for me. One time, a long time ago, one of my Rams had broke down going up to Glenwood Canyon, and it was a sad day because a tow truck rolls up, and it was a Ford tow truck. And I was joking with the guy. I said, sad day when a Ram gets towed back away by a Ford. And he goes, well, no, Ford body, Cummins diesel engine, Allison transmission. Perfect world, right? Everybody likes, for the most part, Ford's looks. We all like Cummins diesel, and we know that Allison's probably one of the best. It was just kind of that's the way they work in the commercial class vehicles. A lot of times they have different aspects of that, but just kind of funny there. But as of the transmission in the Chevy does way better. And by no means am I disparaging the the ability of the torque shift and how good the Ford is. The Ford's a good truck, but the Chevy does better. Downgrading, upgrading, keeping and maintaining speed and feeling in control and not doing busy work. And we could see easily transmission temps stayed lower in the Chevy, like substantially lower. And heat is the killer of everything, okay? Heat will melt a fruit roll up in the window. Well, imagine all that heat in your transmission over and over and over again. So although it wasn't at the top of the range, it was still hotter. At the end of the day, heat kills, okay? So that transmission, I feel, is better long-term, and I think probably most people would agree. Fuel economy winner is the Ford, period. The Ford's always gotten good fuel economy in consideration to the big motor. So although it's negligible, the small amount, we're talking a half a mile to the gallon, the Ford wins in that respect. Overall looks, that's a personal preference, so I'm not going to bang on that. This is about abilities. Build-wise, the Chevy can handle more in its stage that it was versus the Ford. Both of them were set up as much. Again, cost-wise, though, the Chevy came in and beat them again. So when we're talking a $10,000 savings going from a diesel to a gas, and then you save another $4,000 off the sticker price, and then I actually got a deal on this. That's the MSRP, guys. Ford trucks typically resale pretty good. So we're buying those right now currently MSRP, or heaven forbid more. The Chevy I actually got for $55. So in a way, I actually got that for less. And if you're a huge diesel fan, you got to stick with a diesel. The custom level of the L5P, Gen 1 and 2, because they still have some 23s coming in and 24s, is still way under 70. So if you had to have a diesel and you had to go that direction, and but you weren't brand loyal, I would suggest going with a custom level. It's going to give you all the swag you want and give you a diesel option. All right. As for braking, again, brakes weren't really an issue for me. I didn't have to use them. The transmissions did the most work. So in this scenario, I have to say that the Chevy would win the case, even though the brakes weren't necessarily used in either respect. Again, the transmission took care of business. The Ford did allow us to coast more. So at the end of the day, guys, you don't go wrong going with either one of these. But if I'm hooking up and towing every day with one of these gas trucks, I'm going with the Chevy. And I love the Ford. I love my Godzilla. Why? Because it's kicking the pans. It sounds sweet cruising down the road. One thing I touched on in the videos, the Chevy has no exhaust note inside. Even under load, you kind of hear it. And I think that has to do with Chevy's insulation, the way the motor sits way down in the engine compartment. But it was non-existent. So, I mean, it was kind of like driving like a Cadillac type feel when you're driving this more base type truck. But, you know, I hop in the Chevy every day. Now, if I wanted to just haul butt and I like that V8 rumble, then maybe the Godzilla makes sense. But you could up trim this from a custom to an LT and easily compete with the XLT if you liked more swag in there. And so I look at it like this. Again, they're both good trucks. If you just need a truck, but you want an HD, want a little bit better fuel economy, again, it's not a huge difference. It's negligible. So over time, the 1, 2, 3 miles a gallon you're going to get over that, it's going to take so many miles to do it. I don't think that you should really sweat it. If the Chevy was getting 4 and the Godzilla was getting 15, that is a big difference. Again, even going from a diesel, there's just not enough difference. Breaking that up mile per mile over that long term, you'd have to, at 20,000 miles per year, you'd be driving that truck for 10 years before you even thought about recouping the diesel cost. So I hope this kind of broke into comparison. Again, not dodging the Ford. I love my Ford. It's still going to be working when we do the Ike because I want to see how this really does. And I know I had some Ram fans say, man, you got to add a Ram to the channel. I would. However, last year we had one 6.4 Hemi 3/4 ton die with only 30,000 miles. And then another one fragged its motor at 44,000 miles, pulling a 7,000 pound generator up the Ike. So I'm not overly confident in doing that yet. But we'll see how the channel progresses as we go from here. But I would like you guys to hit the subscribe button. Let me know your thoughts. I think a lot of people are going to be surprised because everybody calls me a Ford fanboy. Yeah, maybe. I just like trucks in general. But I'm not here to blow smoke up anybody's rear and tell you that, this one's good when it's not. Okay, the Chevy beat the Ford in every aspect except for fuel economy in this test. And again, when I talk about towing, I want control. I want to be able to get it moving, but more so, I want to be able to slow it down. And then when I got that big, huge thing moving in the wind, I want to feel that truck feeling like it's rock solid. And the Ford was just light here. We hit a bump and it's light and it's light. And the Chevy was just dialed in. And I'm telling you, somebody did ask, and this is a good, I almost forgot to touch on this before we head out, guys, because I appreciate you guys sticking around to the end. Somebody said, what about the in the pants feel? Which one feels like when you get out? Well, initially when I hopped in the Chevy, it was different shift points, and the Allison felt different. But I can't tell that there's 30 more horsepower here. I can't feel it. Again, because you're not running 5,000 RPM, so you'd have to put this thing on a dyno and see what you're actually getting in first and second gear. But at the end of the day, they both feel pretty fun to drive. So I don't think you have to worry about that. Guys, thank you so much for being part of the channel, watching all of our footage. We got the Ike thing coming up with our little fifth wheel here. I got to do some videos on doing some brakes on a trailer. But I do appreciate you liking the videos and hitting the subscribe button. A lot of the stuff that I've also done on the other videos, like LED light swaps and everything like that, tonneaus. If you guys are interested in any of that stuff, you go to that video, click down there. I put a link to the Zon. You can go to the Zon. You can read reviews about that product. And if you don't like that, keep searching the Zon. Because again, most of the products that are on the Zon are still backed by the store that's part of it. So whether it's a back industry cover, that's going to be a back store on there, so you can just save yourself a little bit of dough and get some of that prime shipping. So if you don't like it, you can send it back for free. But guys, we will see you on the next one. And again, I hope you had a lot of fun, and I hope this helped answer some of your questions.